And then bigger than that, we are confused about what it means to be American and what America stands for right now. So to be confused, that goes back to our identity. This level of confusion, we want to cling to the things we are certain about now.
Hey guys, and welcome to The Conversation, a Crossing Party Lines or CPL podcast. CPL is a non-profit that hosts weekly discussions where people with different views share their perspectives on American life and listen to one another to better understand why we believe what we believe. I'm your host, Marcus Johnson, and today we're talking about America turning 250 years old. Let's meet today's guests. I'm very excited to welcome Lisa, co-founder of Crossing Party Lines, born in New Jersey, grew up in California, now calls Oregon home. Lisa spent many years working in information architecture before helping start the organization we call Crossing Party Lines. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Marcus. I'm so happy to be here.
It's so good to have you on the show. We had you on the very first episode. Folks can go listen to that one, the origin story of Crossing Party Lines. But we've got you back, and we're talking about America's 250th birthday. Before that, rapid fire questions, 3 of them, so people can get to know you in 60 seconds. First question, favorite thing to do not called work?
I have 3 favorite things. They are all called work by other people, but I love writing. Anything. I love books, writing essays, things like that. I love gardening, and I love going to Spain and France to walk the Camino de Santiago.
Yes, she does. Number 2, go-to comfort movie.
Okay, it's not a movie. It's actually a K-drama. I love K-dramas, and I love the K-drama Her Private Life. It's just one of my favorites.
Very nice. Final question. What's one goal you're working towards this year?
I am having the greatest time using AI to develop apps for Crossing Party Lines, and these are apps that allow people to benefit from all that we've learned on how to talk across differences, regardless of what kind of difference it is.
Cool. Well, that's Lisa. So thrilled she's joining us today. And we're talking, as I mentioned, about America's 250th birthday. So on July 4th, America celebrated its 250th birthday. For some, it was a historic milestone. For others, it was simply a day off to barbecue and watch fireworks. Americans are feeling a mix of emotions on their country's semi-quincentennial birthday. An Associated Press North America 250 poll found that just half of US adults felt purely proud to be American on the nation's 250th anniversary as it arrived. 4 in 10 Democrats, 3 in 10 adults under 30 described their feelings about the celebration as conflicted. An NBC News Roper poll found nearly 80% of respondents believe the American dream is harder to achieve today than it was for previous generations. However people felt and however they celebrated, America today is vastly different from the country that marked its bicentennial 50 years ago. Lisa, today there are 120 million more American voices to listen to than 50 years ago, as the population has grown from 220 million to 340 million. Since 1970, 50 years ago, the share of Americans 65 and older has nearly doubled from 10% to 18%. People are migrating. The share of Americans living in the south and the west of the country growing from 48% to 63%, and marriage has become less of a priority as the share of American adults who are married has fallen from 70% to 50%. A lot of that data coming from Pew Research looking at census data. Lisa, when people talk about today's political divisions, they often point to recent events. But if you zoom out and look at over the past 50 years, what long-term changes in American life do you think have led us to this moment?
Yeah, I really love this question because we tend to oversimplify it when we're looking at why do we have this divide? Why are our politics as divisive as they are today? And honestly, I think we should go back in history to understand this. You mentioned migration. Another term for it is the big sort, where we have sorted ourselves geographically. So we are living in echo chambers. Our big cities are liberal. The creatives go there, the tech folks go there. And for the most part, the rural areas are more conservative. So our geographical sorting, I think, has definitely led to some of the divisiveness that we're seeing.
People choosing where to live based on politics, as Lisa mentioned. A term coined when I looked by journalist Bill Bishop in 2004 in a series of articles, later became a book that he wrote in 2008, The Big Sort, Why the Clustering of Like-Minded America is Tearing Us Apart.
It's definitely an important aspect of why we're so divided right now.
Yeah.
Another thing is back in the old days, when we first started having radio and then TV, the way the government managed this is what they call the fairness doctrine. So if you wanted to use our airwaves, you needed to pay us back, us, the government, by promising to put a certain percentage of your programming on air simply for public good. And that could be local announcements. It could be the news. It could be some editorials, as long as they were considered for the public good.
Mm-hmm.
So back in 1987, they removed the fairness doctrine. That meant that news services, media outlets that are using our airways do not have to put out any public service announcements, any public good. And our news has shifted from being, oh, we have to put this out there and we're just going to tell the news as the news is, to this is our moneymaker.
Yeah.
We are building our audience through the news we put out there. So our news started to become more politicized. If their audience was primarily conservative, they wanted to make the news more conservative. If our audience is primarily liberal, we'll make the news more liberal. So we started seeing that our news was more divisive. It was more partisan. And more than that, it started to become entertainment to make people want to come back. We want to focus on the scary stuff. We want people to feel threatened one way or another. So it became much more threatening. It was all about hype. Let's put on the most evocative images so you come back and look again. So getting rid of the fairness doctrine led to much of what we point to when we say, oh, it's the media that is causing the problem.
It does seem to be a significant turning point, the Federal Communications Commission, saying they scrapped the policy. They were arguing at the time it violated broadcasters' First Amendment rights. That was their rationale, at least at the time, but has had significant ramifications on how people consume news and what people think of when they think of news today.
Most definitely. And then there was another thing that happened governmentally. The Congress back in 1995 changed the way they scheduled their meetings. So it used to be throughout the week, there would be important things to vote on. And so our politicians, for the most part, were much more likely to have a house in the DC area, to raise their children in the DC area, to socialize with one another because we're right there. There were a lot of friendships that reached across the aisle. Back in 95, they moved to trying to squeeze all of the important meetings into 3 days, generally Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I think it's been played with a bit.
Mm-hmm.
The rationale for that is it allows our politicians time to do what's very important, which is fundraising, to meet with their constituents, to spend more time in their home areas. So most politicians now, they have their family based back home, and they come to DC as a commuter. So it's now a commuter Congress. And that means there's just a lot more divisiveness. People are less likely to have friends who are across the aisle. And so there's less collaboration that's being fostered just simply by that change in the schedule.
It's interesting because the pandemic made people work remotely, and a lot of people work maybe 3 days in the office and the rest of the time not. And you see what this change has done, at least to people's relationships. It's weakened them to a certain extent. This seemed to have quite a significant effect brought in by House Speaker Newt Gingrich in 95.
Yeah, another thing that's been happening in the last 50 years is our voters have made some changes around pretty much, I'll call them civil rights, but basically looking at the needs of minorities and trying to make sure those needs are met. And that has led to gay marriage being accepted. It has led to ADA, the adapting our buildings so the disabled can enter and leave our buildings safely and comfortably. But all of these changes to improve the lives of minorities or marginalized folks has led to what I consider a confusion around how do we treat people, who's important, everybody, the majority or the minority, who do we design for? Do we design for most people, for all people? What we forget is building solutions that work for all people makes every solution very, very complex and much more expensive. It also leads to people kind of pointing a finger at that other group saying, well, you go against our religious beliefs and yet the government's supporting you. This is wrong. Or you're fighting so much for people in wheelchairs. Well, there's hardly any wheelchairs. Why do we have to spend billions of dollars to make it wheelchair accessible? Mm-hmm. So this move to make a better life for everyone, including marginalized and minority people, has a side effect of extra cost, confusion around what's right, what are American values, a lot of things that we certainly didn't think about when we were casting our votes for or against any of our civil rights actions.
Yeah, some of the research from Pew and from the census really does illustrate that it's a much more diverse country in a number of ways. Religious, in terms of people's sexual orientation, in terms of people's ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera. Pew Research Center had some analysis, did some analysis on the U.S. Census data. They showed that the share of the U.S. population that is white has dropped steadily since 1970. It was 83% then and is now 56%. The share of Hispanics is nearly quintupled, going from 4% to 20%. The Asian population from 1 to 6. The black population's ticked up a little bit, but it's a very different racial landscape from the country we knew 50 years ago. And the share of foreign-born people as well, tripling since 1970 from about 5%, an all-time low, to nearly 15% in 2024. It just is a different country. And you said something when we were talking yesterday that I thought was really interesting. People aren't sure anymore what it means to be American.
Yes, yes. And I want to talk a little bit more about that later. But I love that you brought in the percentages. It has been a pet peeve of mine for the last 10 years that this data around the shifting of the demographics has caused our number or percentage of white Americans to drop from the 80s down to right now it's in the 50s, and it's predicted it won't be long that it's below 50%.
Yep.
The media covers it by saying white people are no longer going to be the majority. And then a lot of white folks say, oh my gosh, that's terrible. We're no longer the majority. And I had one person at a Crossing Party Lines meeting talking about this saying, I don't want that. It scares me because I think, what if they treat me the way I have treated minority people? I was so shocked by the way she said that. And the thing is, we may not be the numeric majority over 50%, but there will, in the foreseeable future, I believe, always be more people who are basically white than any other group of people. The percentage of whites will outnumber the colored folks, will outnumber the Asian folks. And so the way the media has covered that has been divisive in and of itself.
Yes, it may not be over 50%, but it will be the largest bucket of people, regardless.
Yes. So I just find that fascinating. And so the last thing that I was thinking about, we have experienced more change in the last 50 years than ever in history. So not only do we have governmental changes, we've talked about the civil rights changes we've talked about, add into that the technology. And so if we think just in terms of transportation, we have moved to electric vehicles, faster cars, bigger planes, more and more introduction of mass transit in areas that never had it. Our social media, we have the internet, we have news coming at us all the time. We now have technology that can create deep fakes where we can't tell what's true. I see a video. I used to be able to believe my eyes, and now I can't believe my eyes. I used to trust what I heard. I can't trust what I hear because they can take my voice and make it sound like I said something I didn't say. They can generate fake news faster than we can write up real news, because fake news, you don't have to worry about the facts. So all of this massive change after change after change, our bodies, our brains are not made to handle this much change. And our gut is saying, let's push back on all these new things, all of these different things. And that has led to all of us feeling more stressed than ever before, feeling more confused than ever before, just overwhelmed.
I really like the way you put it at the start, which is, I literally can't believe my eyes. And at that point, you know something's probably wrong. I went and found some data on this because I thought it was really interesting points, AI and misinformation. 77% of Americans expressing concern over political misinformation. 75% fear the absolute erosion of online trust, according to research from a Verif deepfakes report. There's another point here. When given a list of 15 potential risks associated with AI, Americans rated the spread of misleading video and audio deepfakes as their number one concern. 60% saying they were very concerned, according to YouGov public opinion poll. And then 72% of American consumers worry that AI deepfakes will manipulate and influence elections, according to identity verification firm Jumio.
Yeah, we've just had so much change we have to deal with right now. Unprecedented amount of change on every level, even down to how many people go to college, how many people live with their families. There is pretty much nothing in our lives that hasn't been changing super rapidly over the last 50 years. And the pace of change has sped up. It's just faster and faster and faster, and we're getting exhausted trying to keep up with it all. Most of us feel like we can't. We find our little niche and focus on that so we can feel comfort. Mm-hmm. So overall change leads to divisiveness because we have to shut down. We have to build our walls. We have to protect ourselves.
And not only that, there have been a lot of events which have accelerated that pace of change along the way. You mentioned the education piece, the share of adults who have completed at least a bachelor's degree, more than tripling since 1970, going from 11% to 37%, even greater for women. And the labour force participation for women going from 40% to 60%. For men, actually dropped from 77 to 69. Just everywhere you look, it's just a different world. The one I wanted to mention here as well was, and you'd mentioned it to me before, this idea of a widening economic gap. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a big one because people don't feel like their lives are improving in a lot of ways. And when you look at the data, you can see why in 2023 dollars, workers aged 25 and over with a bachelor's degree or higher earn about $10,000 more annually than they did in 1970. That's not a huge gain. Those with some college, a high school diploma, or those who didn't graduate high school earn less than they did then. The poverty rate has ticked down only slightly in the last 50 years, going from 14% to 11%. That leaves 36 million Americans living below the poverty line, and home ownership rates basically the same, 64%. They haven't changed in the last 50 years. And so that sense of not hopelessness, but you're not seeing your life improve, even though all these, because a lot of these changes are positive. You know, more women in the workplace, more people with higher education, et cetera, et cetera. But people are being left feeling like they're not moving forward in a lot of ways.
I think they're also left with a feeling of, what am I doing wrong? Because if we look at the movies, if we look at TV, we see everyone else is succeeding, you know, and we look at the ads, everyone should wear these fancy clothes or this or that. So if we feel like we're doing something wrong, that makes it even harder on us.
Yeah.
And yet it's not. It's the trends.
There is a cognitive dissonance there between what you're being told in terms of how GDP is doing, what the stock market is performing, how many new millionaires there are every year, and how difficult things are still for the average American. You wrote a really interesting piece about America's 250th birthday, which I'll put a link in the show notes because I thought it was brilliant. And in there you had a quote where you say, every July, Americans celebrate Independence Day. Historically, both liberals and conservatives, and most in between, have celebrated it with fireworks, parades, family gatherings, and gratitude for freedoms we enjoy. This year, you say the holiday has become more complicated. Recent political events, deep divisions, and concerns about the country's direction have left some wondering whether there is anything to celebrate at all. There was a Pew Research Center survey, Lisa, over the past year. Most people, 69%, said they are dissatisfied with the way things are going in the US. 59% think the country's best days are behind us. What three words would you use to sum up the mood of the American people at this moment in history?
Start with disenfranchised. I think most of us have started to question whether either of our primary political parties, the Democrats or the Republicans, is really caring about who we are, what we need. And so what's been happening is the parties, those major parties, have been moving farther and farther away from center. And I think that has to do very much like the media, where you have to differentiate yourself from the other guys. So you want to watch our TV channel? Well, I think the politicians are saying, you have to know what we stand for, which is opposed to what they stand for. So we're getting farther and farther away from the middle. But really, if you look at Americans, the majority of us are in the middle somewhere, leaning left, leaning right, but really caring about the common good, caring about solutions that will work for all of us. But since the major parties don't seem to be understanding that, we've seen a lot of people leaving both Republican and Democratic Party. They're becoming independents. Many are very frustrated because that means they can't vote in primaries and they want to. Many people feel like whatever their vote is, it doesn't matter. There's so many other people that my vote is being washed away. It's hard to feel like you can connect with your representatives on a federal level. So we are starting to feel disenfranchised. We don't matter. There's just nothing we can do to truly make a difference, at least on a federal level.
Since moving to the States 13, 14 years ago now, that's a huge one. Most people I talk to, when I talk to them about America and how they feel about the country, this comes up, this sense of lack of agency, feeling detached, but also feeling like they can't do anything about it. So why even bother?
It's been my experience that when you combine the effects of COVID and the pandemic with what's been happening on the national stage, we're starting to feel hopeless and helpless about everything and lack of agency everywhere. It's not really true. There's a lot of areas where we have agency, even in terms of government.
Right.
I think when we start to shift back to local, and the more hyper local we get, the more agency we have, the more we can make a difference, and we can see that difference. I suspect that's part of why we're seeing so many protests right now related to ICE. They're saying, I can at least stand outside and say what I think and have my voice heard. That is a sense of empowerment. The media kind of does this because it's harder and harder to find local news. The federal news is very, very dominant. We've seen the death of many, many local newspapers. Many other newspapers were purchased by big conglomerates where, again, they cut back on how much local news they're providing. So if our media is not even reminding us we can work locally, then that encourages us to feel a lack of agency.
It does feel as though people spend 50% of their time paying attention to what's going on nationally, maybe 30% at the state level, 20% locally. Whereas those percentages in terms of impact, influence on your life day to day specifically, you would flip them. 50% local, etc., etc. Okay, disenfranchised is one. What else do we have?
Exhausted.
Yes.
Trying to keep up with everything. And that can be the news. News is all over. I gotta fact check. I gotta find this. I've got to find that. I'm exhausted by that. There is social media. I've got to look good. I'm not looking as good as those other. I have to work harder and harder and harder. Or finances. I've got to keep working harder. Everyone else is successful and I'm not. Everything is exhausting right now. We don't get a lot of time to take breaks. When I travel, I've had a lot of Europeans saying, why do you Americans exhaust yourself and work so hard? We have more balance. We don't require that many hours. We give more vacation. I think it's a lot more than that. I think it's the mental exhaustion of our social media, our news feeds, our desire to make a difference and not being able to. I think it exhausts us.
Yeah, I noticed this work ethic growing up because my dad's American. And then moving to the and I was like, I'm never going to work that much. I never did when my first few years of my career in England. And then you move to America, and it just consumes you. This idea of living to work versus working to live. It is hard to break away from. I think it is ingrained in people that it's almost part of the American dream. It's almost part of being American is working as much as humanly possible. I think it's going to take a while to have this behavioral shift, this cultural shift of, no, I don't need to place my worth or my value in how much I work, because that's not the most important thing in life.
Yeah, I think it's somewhat built into the concept of the American dream.
Yes.
As Americans, we're told if we just work harder and harder and harder, we will succeed and we will get rich. We're not seeing that to be true. And so I love the American dream. I think it's part of who we are. It's a great thing for us all to identify with, but I think it can be misleading and it can lead to becoming out of balance.
Yeah. Disenfranchised, exhausted. What's the last one?
Confused. I don't think I've met a single person who doesn't say they're confused about how someone on the other side could vote the way they vote. It doesn't matter what side they're on. I'm confused by those other people.
Yes.
And really, I think they mean I'm confused by those parties, because when you talk to individuals, they make perfect sense.
Yes.
It's just what the parties are doing, or often the politicians are doing, that doesn't make sense. We are confused about technology right now. I get a new phone, it takes me forever to figure out all the features. Or I'm looking at an app that I use all the time, but they've redone the user interface. I'm confused by technology all the time. We're confused about how to get ahead. We don't understand why, hey, I just want to move up in the workplace. I want to get a new job. Why is it so hard to apply for a job and get a job right now? A lot of people will point to AI as doing the filtering and other stuff, but nothing works the way it used to work anymore. And then bigger than that, we are confused about what it means to be American and what America stands for right now.
Yes.
And so to be confused, that goes back to our identity. This level of confusion, we want to cling to the things we are certain about now. And so I hate to say this, but it used to be, let's push back on identity politics. I think all politics has become identity politics. It's all tapping into how we see ourselves, what we identify with. And really, I think we can relate that to what makes sense to me. that helps us get beyond the confusion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense that we care about people. It makes sense that we protect our borders. It makes sense that we work towards economic prosperity. So we identify more strongly with that, which means we have a harder time listening to the other side as well. But I think the confusion we feel around so many things, add that to the disenfranchisement and the exhaustion, it just adds to, it's really hard for us to sleep at night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's so much stress. There's so much going on.
Yeah. Two things there. One, the technology part of this, when you talk about confused, I found this data point fascinating. 70% of Americans admit that they have become significantly more skeptical of all content they see online due to the mere existence of deepfake technology. That's according to Jumio. So the knock-on effect of deepfake technology exists. Now I feel like I can't trust most things. And then the second part of that, in linking back to what we were saying earlier about people not understanding or people trying to figure out what it means to be an American, in the crossing party lines meetups, because we're celebrating 10 years. What have you seen in terms of, well, I guess two things, how things have changed over that time that have been significant, but then also how people are redefining or creating this new sense of what it means to be American and doing it together and seeing, working on this design of what it means to be an American in terms of the identity together?
I'd like to preface this with saying that for the most part, I interact with people who already believe that what's important is to learn to talk across the aisle,
Right.
to talk with people whose views are different than ours. But what I am seeing there is more and more people identifying with that, saying this is what's good for democracy. This is what's good for America. I am overcoming the discomfort of talking to someone whose views are different than my own because it's good for me, it is good for the country, it is good for democracy. So I would say more people are starting to recognize that we need to somehow learn to work together. Mm-hmm. And again, that's based on the people I spend most of my time with.
I said earlier that a lot of Americans feeling dissatisfied with how the direction that their country is going in. And that Pew survey of 16 countries, including Canada, Australia, Italy, the UK, Israel, Spain, etc., Americans ranked second to last in terms of satisfaction with their country's democracy. It does seem like it's not just on my party's in office, I feel good about things, my party isn't, I don't. Both parties now not happy with how things are going. Nearly half of Republicans dissatisfied with the way things are going in the country. 92% of Democrats also agreeing with that statement. And so it does kind of beg this question of, if you are feeling confused, if you are feeling exhausted, if you are feeling disenfranchised, for people who feel discouraged, for people who feel disconnected from politics, from their country, what these are some practical ways they can help shape the direction of the country and try and regain a sense of agency?
I love this question. And I'm going to say that I'm a little bit shocked by my answer because I am one who believes it's really important to complicate the narrative, that everything we're getting coming at us from the media oversimplifies everything. Mm-hmm. But my simple answer to this is just care about your community. What we see is the more local your focus, the more positive you feel. When you are focused locally, you have more agency. Your vote matters. Your donation to individual politicians or causes matter a whole lot more than ever before. When you are volunteering locally, getting involved in your church and getting involved in Rotary or the schools, any of those things, you start to see how amazing the people you live with are. You start to be proud of being part of this community.
Good word.
We make friends across the aisle because we all live in the same town. I live in Portland, which is hyper liberal. And it's really easy to think that, oh, this is a good place to live and we're good people. But, you don't want to go live in those rural areas. That sounds scary. Well, I just spent some time in Burns, Oregon, which is very rural. It is in the middle of nowhere. And I will say, I had the greatest time. I met so many amazing people. There was this very strong sense of community. There was a strong sense of loving America, but that America not being a vision of America, but truly loving America and all that it stands for. Mm-hmm. I think when you're in a rural area like that, you're pretty much forced to be hyperlocal. You do get to know everyone in your town. You know what challenges they're facing. And so I think that the folks in those rural areas have a leg up on those folks living in the more metropolitan areas. But definitely the place that we're going to have a sense of agency, and it can start as small as a neighborhood. I live in a neighborhood that you drive down my street and then you have to loop around a few streets in order to get out. It's a closed area. And we wave at one another, but we don't know one another. This summer, I decided to do some landscaping in my front yard, and I needed lots of cardboard. And I spent hours and hours in there. I was basically covering all the grass with cardboard and then mulch. So I put up a sign saying, neighbors, I'm going to need a lot of cardboard for this project. If you have some, please drop it off. Over the last 2 months, I've met more neighbors than ever before. I'm out there every day as they walk their dogs. I get to know who walks their dogs when, and I miss them when they're not walking their dog that particular day. People will stop by and say, hey, this is looking good. You're making lots of progress. Or others will stop by and say, can I help? So just being in my front yard doing this landscaping project is turning our neighborhood into a real community, which it stopped being during COVID.
Right.
We have to work to rebuild our local communities because our local community has suffered greatly because of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And we've lost track of our opportunities to interact with one another. We've become less comfortable interacting with one another. So we need to reclaim that.
And it goes back to kind of what we were saying about people being confused, people being disenfranchised, people being exhausted. One of the things that starts to erode is trust. And trust in people and trust in your fellow Americans and being out in your community and being able to feel proud about your country again, being able to trust the people who live across the street from you and then build out from there. 250 years ago, America set out on the Great American Experiment, as it's called. I think one of the things working against it was that they were doing it across an entire continent. And when I lived in the UK, or come back to the UK to visit family, I know what's going on. People in the UK know what's going on in the UK. They kind of know what's going on in Europe, but mostly in the UK. People in Italy know what's going on in Italy and a little bit of Europe. America's 50 states and Europe is basically 50 countries. And this idea of having to know what's going on in all of those other countries, similar to how people who live in Arizona have to know what's going on in all those other states, can be incredibly overwhelming, even if it is the same language, the same culture, roughly, it changes, etc. So it does feel like America's got that working against it. Zooming in, not out, I think is a really, really solid piece of advice. Also speaking to your neighbors, learned about this concept recently, the liking gap. This concept, you think that the person that you come across and interact with likes you less than they actually do. You leave the interaction thinking that they think of you as a 3 out of 10 in terms of the interaction. Actually, it was a 6 out of 10. And so this reluctance to get back out in the world after the pandemic, to talk to people, to talk to our neighbors, is a big misconception because it's going to go a lot better than you think it's going to go.
It is. I think there's another aspect of focusing on local and hyperlocal that we don't realize right now. I've had people hear me say this is what I believe is the best thing to do, and they'll push back and say, but we have to deal with what the administration is doing. We have to deal with our immigration problem. We need to focus on that. That's so important. Mm-hmm. What we forget is we are at the heart, not just 50 experiments, but hundreds and thousands of experiments as to how to make democracy work, how to make community work. Our founding fathers were letting the states do whatever they wanted for the most part, and then we learned from one another. So if one state figures it out, the rest can learn, and democracy and America can move forward. Well, what we do in our local communities impacts what the states do, the entire state that we live in, which can impact the federal government. So even though you may feel like, oh, I'm just working locally, not only is it good for you and the community, in the end, it's going to be very good for the United States of America.
Yeah, that's how grassroots movements happen. It's also incredibly infectious when you see somebody talking to somebody else, doing a good deed for somebody else, starting something in their community. And I think the other great misconception is that if you want to be civically engaged, you have to just vote. And there's so many other ways to when you go and look at a list of ways to be civically engaged, there's youth development, there's lobbying, there's supporting your local library, staying informed, there's just talking to people, demonstrating, there's charity, there's volunteering, there's Too many things. I'm sure people have time for, but picking one and getting started there, I think, can be incredibly empowering.
Yes. And you have to start somewhere. So why not start where it's an easier lift and more people are going to feel better about it. You'll feel better about yourself. The people you're working with feel better.
Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned, Cross the Party Lines turned 10, co-founded, started by yourself and Kareem, two incredible friends of mine now. You've done a lot of work in terms of getting people to talk to each other again and to listen to each other again. What are some of the things that have changed in terms of how you think about those interactions and how they can continue to be improved upon?
So I want to talk about this in two ways. And the first one has to do with what does it mean to be politically divided? What is toxic polarization? Traditionally, we've talked about it as affective polarization, whether you like the other side or at least have goodwill towards the other side. What we've seen over those 10 years, we started by addressing affective polarization, getting people together, see that, oh, this person who lives down the street and happens to be in the other party is a nice guy, so you feel better about the other side. But we've also noticed that there's some thinking aspect to polarization. We call this cognitive polarization that we push back on. And that is, how do you think about the other side? It has become very common to be dismissive of anyone who votes differently than we do, to assume that they are watching the wrong news. They are believing the fake news. They are not as smart. They're not as educated. So we look down on them. And we basically don't respect their ability to make good choices. So that is what I consider cognitive polarization. So we've been working at both sides of that. So how do we get people together so that they have goodwill towards the other side? And how do we help them see that people on all sides are equally intelligent, equally caring, work just as hard to come up with the right answers for however we're supposed to vote? So we have introduced things like learning about moral foundations theory that helps us recognize, yes, the other side voted differently than we did, but it does not mean they're immoral. Mm-hmm. It means they're differently moral. They care about different aspects of right answers, best way to vote. We teach people about biases, and we recognize that we ourselves are biased. And we are susceptible to bad logic, to confirmation bias, only seeking out information that supports what we already believe, things like that. And so when we notice the other side is biased, we're not saying they're biased, we're not. We're saying, oh, we're all biased. Let's work together to move beyond biases. So we have introduced workshops and concepts that we write about that are about both the cognitive polarization and trying to address that, and the affective polarization and trying to address that. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I find really intriguing is when I started this work, the goal was to figure out how to talk with my cousin who's politically very different from myself. And how do we have productive conversations? What does it even mean to be a productive conversation? So over time, we have developed training around how to listen to someone whose views are different, how to talk with someone whose views are different, how to ask curious questions to understand people better. And over the last few years, I've been noticing that all of these skills that we teach, whether they're the cognitive or affective depolarizing techniques, all of them work just as well in the workplace, work just as well in your home. That what we've been doing is not simply about talking across political differences, but is talking across all differences. Mm-hmm. And I've started to think of this as conversation hygiene. Mm. When I was having a hard time sleeping, I went to a sleep doctor and he says, well, the first thing is to get you some good sleep hygiene habits. And I'm going, huh? What do you mean? He says, well, a dark room, a quiet room, those are obviously better for sleeping. To make sure you go to bed at the same time every night so your body gets used to it and falls asleep automatically. For conversations, what we do at Crossing Party Lines creates conversation hygiene. It's good practice, whatever conversation you are in, to first recognize you need to understand what the other person is saying before your response is going to be appropriate or meaningful. Mm-hmm. So we practice different ways of understanding where a person's statement becomes misunderstood. We become misunderstood when you're thinking about something else and not really listening, where we misunderstand someone when we use labels and jargon that one side hears one way, another hears another way. So we teach people to really focus on first understanding what another person has to say. The next one is, if you're going to say something to someone, what's really helpful if they know why you're saying it, what it is, and what you want out of them. So a complete statement that shares all of that makes it more likely that they'll be listening, they'll be understanding, and they'll be willing to step in and support you. So I'm starting to think of what we do as conversation hygiene that helps everyone anywhere.
I love this term. And when you told me about it, the first thing that came to mind was this thing that people do where they say, well, the fact of the matter is, and what they really mean is, my opinion is X, and separating the opinion from the fact, I think maybe part of that conversation hygiene that you're talking about.
Most definitely. So we do work hard at helping people recognize you're sharing your truth, your opinion, you're not sharing the facts.
Right.
We also do a lot. We recently introduced a couple of workshops on talking about science and fact, which are where the sticklers in political conversations, but they're sticklers in all conversations. So when I see a fact and I report it to you, I can say, well, it's a fact that. But what's really important is, hey, I read somewhere that this happened, or that this is a statistic that they've discovered. And that has influenced the way I think about it in this way.
Yes.
That puts a context around that fact. It allows someone who heard something different to be curious about it and not push back on it. So the way we talk about science and fact, those need to be addressed if we're going to deal with this problem of cognitive polarization. And we need to address that in our own lives. You know, let's say I'm talking to my spouse and they share something, and I might say, in my mind, I'm going, well, why does he think that? That's not the way it happened. But what I can say is, wow, you remember it differently than I do. When I think about that, I just keep remembering that little girl who was doing this or that. So creating the space for myself to have a reality, for you to have a reality, for our realities to be different, but to talk about our realities and then figure out what do we do from here is so important for any conversation in any relationship.
A lot of things that have happened in the last 250 years, and the last 50 years in particular, have gotten better. More people are educated, more women in the workplace, people are traveling places more, there's more diversity. Conversations seem to have been going the opposite way and deteriorating, and crossing party lines is one conversation at a time, helping to get people to learn, to relearn how to talk to each other. I can think of no better time than right now to be doing that work on America's 250th birthday. I want to cite one more thing that you said in the piece that I referenced earlier, because I think it's a great way to close out the show. You were writing, perhaps patriotism isn't measured by whether we celebrate without criticism or criticize without celebration. Perhaps it is measured by whether we care enough to stay engaged, whether we volunteer in our communities, serve our neighbours, vote, protest peacefully, mentor young people, run for office, support local organisations, or simply take the time to understand someone whose views differ from our own. We are participating in the ongoing work of democracy. And that's where I'll leave the conversation. Lisa, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your thoughts with the listeners.
Thank you, Marcus. This has been great. I always love talking to you.
My pleasure is always mine. I'll put a link, as I said, to Lisa's full article in the show notes. And thanks to everyone for listening in. If you want to share your thoughts and feelings about American life, then head to crossingpartylines.com, sign up for a meetup and join the community. Speaking of communities, we'll see everyone in a few weeks for another episode of The Conversation, a Crossing Party Lines podcast.